Hello, my name is John Sherck. I am a small-scale farmer here in northern Indiana. I live in the town of Bristol. On my farm, I produce seed for staple crops being things like grains and dry beans. I want to start by asking 3 questions. The first question would be to ask yourself, what are the things I like to eat? What are the things I enjoy eating or are just part of what is my normal diet? The second question would be, what are the things that are grown in my region? What kind of foods do the farmers or the neighbors grow, or the kinds of things that I grow in my garden? And then the third question, which is really the question that focuses on what I do here with my little operation, is what could I grow in my region? What I have found over the years is there are many, many different kinds of crops that traditionally are not grown in my region here in Indiana, but things that could be grown in my region. So I'm going to kind of start from there. The 3 questions that I'd asked earlier, number 1, what do you like to eat? What is grown in your region and what could be grown in your region? If we address that third question, that has been the focus of what I've been working with over the last number of years, is trying to find new types of crops that can be grown successfully here in Indiana. Things that people commonly don't think about, like peanuts, or upland rice, and maybe barley, different kinds of dry bean we're maybe not familiar to seeing in our fields. Traditionally in Indiana, where I live, most farmers grow predominantly corn and soybeans. I grow a number of different things. I grow upland rice, and not only one variety of upland rice. In some cases I'll grow 10, 15 different types per season. The most important critical point of biodiversity is that whatever I have tastes good. I don't want just whatever common modern variety of wheat there is available. I want to find something that's very delicious, makes great bread. Same thing with rice or any other crop. So that's the first primary reason for biodiversity, is to increase the diversity of foods that I can eat and have more nutritious and more diverse foods. The second issue with biodiversity is the role it plays in mitigating climate change issues. I want to talk about climate change from my own personal vantage point, which is here on the farm, what I deal with. What I've been dealing with these last, say, 6-7 years has been an influx of extreme heavy weather events during the season. Traditionally in the past, as a kid, I can remember when we had a thunderstorm, or even 10-15 years ago, we would get an inch or 2 of rain, which is a lot of rain for one afternoon. These last few years, we've been experiencing events where sometimes I'll get 3 inches of rain in one afternoon, and in extreme cases, 5 inches of rain over the course of 2 days. Now that creates a host of problems. The number 1 problem that I have to address is erosion. And erosion is when you get a lot of rainfall and the water comes so fast that the ground cannot absorb the water, and so you get what's called runoff. And so your topsoil basically is rushing off the property into the low areas. And that's something I've had to deal with, especially in the springs when my field is most vulnerable because I've just planted the crops and there's no plants in place to protect. Another problem is lodging, and lodging is tied again to heavy rainfall. Lodging is when you have a tall crop like wheat or rye, certain types of legumes or rice. When that crop is growing and you get a heavy rain, sometimes some wind, it knocks the crop over, which then can damage the crop and possibly lead to not even be able to harvest the crop. Another problem has been the increase of disease. In the summers here in Indiana, when it's traditionally fairly hot, usually in the mid-80s, sometimes a little hotter, and you have a lot of humidity and a lot of rain, you can start getting lots of problems with fungal diseases. One disease I have a real problem with is called fusarium, and that is a problem that can affect corn, it can affect wheat. And so when you have very humid and wet conditions, fusarium can become a real problem, and basically it can make your crop inedible. And then another problem with extreme weather events, and that can include drought too. We've had periods of really wet to it doesn't rain for 3 weeks. That creates problems in itself. But the one problem is pests. So insects are affected by climate change. Aphids, for example, if you have a wet spring, aphids definitely can become more of a problem. They will not only eat the plants, suck the juices out of the plants, but they also can be a vector to spread disease to other plants. Some of the solutions that I've been working with to help mitigate things like erosion and lodging and different problems, disease, is I've been using a concept of perennial strip cropping. What that means is traditionally I would have a whole field that I would grow, say, wheat or corn or whatever in. And then when I get heavy rain, because the field's a little sloped, I would get erosion of the soil. So putting in a perennial strip crop would be, in my case, about every 12 feet, I put in a 2-foot strip of some type of a perennial plant. I'm using comfrey, which is a wonderful kind of a medicinal but also fertilizer plant. There's different kinds of legumes that you can plant, shrubs. I happen to really enjoy hazelnuts, as they can be, pruned and maintained. But what this does is it creates a barrier strip so that when you have a heavy rainfall event, as that water moves across the field, it comes to that perennial strip and it stops it. The water may pool a bit, but instead of eroding the field, that water will then eventually soak back into the soil where it does the most good, instead of removing my topsoil. So that's one solution I've found, that using biodiversity, having a lot of different crops instead of monocropping. Another one would be the idea of, for the disease for sure, I plant a lot of diverse mixtures. So for example, in one field, instead of growing one type of wheat, I may be growing 5 different kinds of wheat. I may also be growing 5 different types of barley and 5 different types of oats. So having different varieties, different species of the same plant in the same field, disease generally will not affect all those varieties at once. Certain varieties are going to be more disease resistant and others less disease resistant. The disease is not easily able to just spread across the field because all the plants are the same. So that's another solution. Another way of looking at biodiversity, I specifically do not grow any modern varieties. I focus primarily on heritage varieties, sometimes referred to as landrace varieties, and also some very ancient varieties for some of the grains and other crops. Some of these very, very old varieties that were traditionally grown that have lost favor also were very disease resistant. One example would be wheat from the Republic of Georgia. The wheats of the Republic of Georgia are known to be the most disease resistant in the world. So I've slowly been trying to locate seed for some of these varieties like Dika, Sitli Doli, there's some others, and begin to replicate growing them here and be able to hopefully increase the seed stock and make that seed available to other growers and farmers in my region. Another example similar to that would be the inclusion of upland rice here in Indiana, a very uncommon crop that people don't think about that does really well. The nice thing about upland rice is when you have extreme weather periods where you get a lot of rainfall, rice is one crop that does not mind having wet feet. It does not even really mind if the water pools around the base of the plant. So I found rice to be very tolerant of extreme weather, the rainfall. When it comes to drought, that's a different story. Rice does not like drought. That's part of being diverse. You have to have a lot of different types of crops that you're growing. The last thing I want to talk a little bit about is the importance of seed saving for diversity. And if it's very simple to think about the idea that I go to a lot of difficulty to find all these different types of crops that I can grow here in my region, I also have to learn to save that seed. I'm not going to repurchase that seed every year because that economically doesn't make much sense. What makes sense is when I have a crop that I find that does really well, to be able to learn how to save that seed, replant the next year, save the seed again, replant the next year. It does a couple of things. Number one, the crop will adapt to my soil types, to my weather. It's also adapting to the changing weather pattern in my region, whether that's drought or excess moisture. So the crop becomes adapted. Some crops can't, but most crops can become adapted. But it also then gives you the chance to do selective breeding. When you save seed and I go out and I select for the best ear of corn or the best panicle of rice, whatever I'm looking for as the farmer, I'm selecting the best of that year. Hopefully over time I'm actually improving the variety a little bit. I actually think it's probably one of the most critical aspects of food systems that has not been really addressed in the last few years. Farmers do not save their seed anymore like they did, at least here in the United States they don't. This is my seed room. This room is filled with bins, and in each of these bins is seed that I've collected or been growing these last. Some of the seed's very old. I store seed. I actually have a freezer in the other room that's where I store stuff, but basically all my seed is in this room. It's a representation of close to 200 different varieties of seed. I've grown everything from cotton to kanaf. I could go on, a large list. I am not growing all this seed because I expect zombies to show up anytime. The idea of growing and saving your own seed One of the concepts is food security or seed security. By learning how to save your seed, it creates a level of security for the homesteader or the gardener or the farmer to always have a source of their own adapted seed and not be reliant on some other organization or seed company in another state or even another country. I do a lot of seed sharing. I have a seed business, so I sell seed, but I also love to share seed. Here's a couple of tubs of all the seed that has been sent to me from people all over, in some cases all over the world. And these are all varieties that are going to be grown out at some point in the future. Here's some different packets of corn. This happens to come from Italy. Here are some different Native American corns. There's ones here from the Potawatomi Indians. There's some here from up in Minnesota. There's even some from Mexico or Southwest US, like the Chapalote Brown. There's one, a black one, that is from Peru, black Cully. The truth is I probably will not be growing all these varieties out. But the seed comes into me, I store it, and as I have opportunity and I find other people interested, I will share packets of this seed with them so that they can then start to grow out and maintain the variety. If it grows well for them, hopefully they'll maintain it, increase the seed stock, and maybe at some point send some seed back to me. And especially important for a healthy food system, seed saving. It can be done on a large scale by farmers, but it can be done as simply by a gardener at home saving their own tomato seed year after year for a variety that they love. So those are just some of the ideas regarding food systems, regarding biodiversity, how I approach it, and probably the number one issue as a farmer that I've dealt with is climate change and how it's affected me. All these ideas all are interrelated in different ways, but biodiversity has been a real tool in my arsenal to deal with all kinds of problems related to climate change and other types of problems as well.